Welcome back to the Power of Coffee. This is the next 10 pages to make the 170th page of the story. Where are we now in the story? We've learned from the previous page, 160th page, that our protagonist, Martha, Martha has gone to Belinda's house. Belinda is her boss. So Martha has gone to Belinda's house to find out when she'll be reopening the coffee shop so they could go back to work. But then she's not home, and a neighbor is about to tell her something about Belinda. So that's where we are. Let's continue with the story. Okay. So this is the neighbor's words telling her about where Belinda is, okay? Because she's gone to see if she could find Belinda at home, but Belinda is not home. So the neighbor says, "She's not in. She moved." The tall, slender woman with long braided hair told me without me asking. "When did she move?" I inquired, looking surprised. "Oh, just about 3 days or so ago," she said, and then attempted to walk away, but stopped and asked, "Do you have something?" Okay, so Martha inquires when Belinda left, and the woman responds, the neighbor responds, "Oh, just about 3 days or so ago," she said, and then attempted to walk away, but stopped and asked, "Do you have something with her?" "No, I just wanted to speak with her," I said. "Well, why don't you call her? You have a number, don't you?" she said, and then I smiled, because I had not thought about that. I thanked my counselor, and then sat down on a stool at the veranda, and then dialed her up. I thanked my counselor, and then sat down on a stool at the veranda, and then dialed her up. It rang for about 2 minutes, and then went dead. I called again, and it was the same. I called for the 10th time when I got home, but Belinda did not pick up. Now it was clear to me that I was alone. I sat on my bed, pondering over the future of my work life. Was I going to remain this way forever, always looking for a better job? I was an undergraduate degree holder. I studied for 4 years and earned a second-class upper accolade. Yet I was working as a waitress and earning a mere $20 per month. Was this the life I was going to enjoy for all eternity? I thought hard about it, and then decided that I was going to be the manager of the coffee house, just as my former boss Betty had casually predicted some time ago. I had a long shower and sang to cheer myself up. Okay, so we learned that Martha has found out about Belinda's absence. She's out of town. Belinda is her boss, and she's pondering if she's going to be looking for a job all the time. She loved her time at the coffee shop, so she's decided that she's going to take up the job of managing the place, okay, with or without anyone's help. I ate dinner with a smile on the face, and then I pushed myself to sleep by watching 2 movies in a row. 2 days later, I met Anne at her restaurant and then informed her of my resolve. She was smiling and staring a bit surprised at me as I narrated my decision to reopen the coffee house. I spoke for about 7 minutes, and throughout she said nothing, just stared with a surprise. "All right, okay, if you think you can manage it, then go for it." That's what she said, about 3 minutes after I had spoken. I smiled and then gently nodded, but I was expecting more from her. Something like, "Fine, I will support you, I will help you reopen. I will tell Selassie or someone to assist you." However, she said nothing like that. I was all alone. I left her place and went straight home to think. I needed assistance. And where was I going to get it? Should I tell Mom? I wondered and nearly went ahead with it, but changed my mind when something came in. My senior high school graduate, my senior high school classmates and friends. I knew about 5 of them: Dora, Margaret, Ikria, Aisha, and Mami Esi. But I did not know where they lived, nor did I have their phone numbers. Damn, that would have been easy. I thought about it, how I was going to track them down, and then, suddenly, an idea came to mind. I knew someone who knew one of them. Her name was Joanna, and she was a church member, as well as a colleague at the local university I graduated from. I had Joanna's number, and so I called her up a day later, and she connected me with Mami Esi. Mami Esi was my favorite among the girls at school. She was of medium height, brown-toned, and a little slender. I met her during the second term, after I left the boarding school of my former school. After I left the boarding house of my former school, Esi was an entertainer by nature, and she was one of the reasons why I was always eager to come to school. She told stories and cracked jokes that no one could. She told stories and cracked jokes that no one could ignore. It had been 5 years since I saw her. However, I used to have her phone number, and we used to chat on Facebook, but it all stopped when I went to the university, and I lost her number. My plan was to recruit these 5 great friends of mine to assist me in running the coffee house. My plan was to recruit these 5 great friends of mine to assist me in running the coffee house. But who could tell if they were interested or not? And even if they were, majority of them were living far away. I decided to call Esi, and I did, a day after I got her number from Joanna. Okay, so now we learn that Martha is planning to reopen the coffee shop, and she's planning on recruiting her 5 friends from high school to assist her. So she's gotten the number of one of them, that's Esi, from a colleague at the university, Joanna, and she's called Esi up, okay, to talk about her coming to help her run the coffee house. So that's where we are now. The phone rang twice before it ended, and then I redialed, and it acted the same way. Mami Esi was the key to finding the others, and thus I tried again and again until someone picked it up. Hello? A soft-pitched, confident voice. Hello? A soft-pitched, confident voice called from the other end, and I immediately responded, smiling. Hello, is this Mami Esi? I asked. Hello, she responded, sounding as though she couldn't hear me. Hello? I repeated, asking if she was the one. Subsequently, she remarked that indeed she was Esi, and then I had to reveal my identity. Back in the day, everyone had a nickname at school. Mine was known as Air and Frama in the local dialect. I thought she could recall me with that, and so I stated it. And then waited for her response. There was silence for more than 2 minutes, and then a shallow voice asked, Martha, is that you? Yes, it's me, I replied, and then chuckled. Consequently, she broke into loud laughter, and I joined in, and then we reunited over the phone. She wanted to know where I got her number from, how I was, what I was doing, and how I looked now, okay, I look like now. Okay, she wanted to know where I got her number, how I was, what I was doing, and how I looked now. For those days, back in school, I was like the wind, light and weightless. I learned a lot from Esi in just about 7 minutes of being on the phone. 5 years ago, after we completed high school, she went back home to her birth town, okay, her hometown. Okay, so now we know that Martha has been able to reconnect with her friend Mamiesi, who was a classmate of hers at high school, okay. And the reason why she got in touch with Mamiesi is that she needs help, okay. She needs her help as well as the help of others in running the coffee shop. I learned a lot from AC in just 7 minutes of being on the phone. 5 years ago, after we completed high school, she went back home to her hometown. There she worked in her mother's large convenience store as an assistant manager. Unfortunately, her mother fell ill, and then she took over the entire management of the place. It was a thriving business, but when the 55-year-old passed, she lost the will to continue. She gave up the business to a relative and then returned to the capital. And here she had been ever since. And here she had been ever since. I asked her what she had been doing for survival, and she laughed because of the word I used, survival. I used to work in a boutique, but the pay wasn't that great, so I quit, she answered, in a casual, non-caring tone. So what are you doing now? Are you busy? I said. Now I'm just at home. I sell some things, little things like vegetables, bread, and some charcoal. But the charcoal is not mine. I sell it for some woman in the neighborhood. She replied. Okay, I softly remarked, thinking about the possibility of employing her in the coffee shop. What about you? Where do you live? What are you doing? I heard you went to university, Mamiesi blurted in a highly amused tone. Yes, I was at the university, but it doesn't matter because I don't have a job, I said in a cheerful tone, and then she chuckled. It's true, but I own a coffee shop now, and I need someone to help me run it. I spilled the beans in a casual tone. Really? Where is it? She asked, and I told her where it was. For a moment she was quiet, and then she remarked that it was such coincidence since she was living nearby. Okay, she asked, and I told her where it was. For a moment she was quiet, and then she remarked that it was such coincidence since she was living nearby. I ended the conversation after getting her residence address, and during the weekend I went to visit. She was home and sitting by her small table. Okay, she was home and sitting by her small tabletop grocery shop. Okay, she was home and sitting by her small tabletop grocery shop. Beside her was a large collection of charcoal in a small plastic. Beside her was a large collection of charcoal in small plastic black bags. Mamiesi appeared a little plump and wore a cloth wrapped. Mamiesi appeared a little plump and wore a cloth wrapped round her waist. I was about 50 meters away from her when she glanced at my direction and then looked away, not recognizing me. I was about 50 meters away from her when she glanced at my direction and then looked away, not recognizing me. As I got closer, she glanced again, probably to find out who her next customer was. She looked away after a few minutes and then stood up and began to arrange some things on the table. At this moment I was close enough to be seen, but recognized I couldn't tell. It had been 5 years since we last saw each other. It had been 5 years since we last saw each other. At high school, we both had low-cropped hairlines. Now mine was permed and hers was plaited. I was still tall, just as I was in high school, but I was no longer weightless. I now weighed about 65 kilos on average, whereas she appeared a little plump. Finally, I was standing next to her, and then greeted her according to the hour. Finally, I was standing next to her, and then greeted her according to the hour. Okay, so now we learned that Martha has gone to see her friend Mamiesi at her place, her home, and she's close enough to be seen now, but it seems Mamiesi hasn't seen her yet. So that's where we are now. Finally, I was standing next to her and then greeted her according to the hour. She casually responded and then glanced at me. I smiled, grinned, but she didn't make anything of it. She asked me what I wanted to buy, and then I told her, "Mamiesi, don't you recognize me?" She looked at me, and about 2 minutes later she screamed. It was a shattering cry that physically shook me up. I held my chest and gently inhaled to control my heartbeat. But she wasn't bothered at all as she threw her arms around me. Consequently, we sat on the porch of her small, rented hall and chamber apartment. I took a sachet of water from her, and while I sipped, we talked about why I came to see her. I told her the story of my journey through the business world, my first job at the convenience store where the robbery took place, and then my second job at a large electronics shop where the manager of the place kept his eyes on me in an uncomfortable way. I told her about my journey through the business world, my first job at the convenience store where the robbery took place, and then my second job at a large electronics shop where the manager of the place kept his eyes on me in an uncomfortable way. Then I told her about Betty and her daughter and friend. Lamley, their unexpected passing, and everything else that I wanted to get off my chest. "I'm sorry," she consoled, and then in a lively tone added, "So, when are you reopening the shop?" "Tomorrow, if I have someone to help me," I replied, and then she chuckled and remarked, "All right, then I'm in." "What about your store? Who is going to run it for you?" I said, staring at her in surprise. "Oh, that's not a problem. I can easily get someone to look after it," AC replied. So I had one assistant now. But I needed more. I needed waiters, and I needed someone who knew how to cook. I relayed it all to AC and then asked about the others, Aisha, Equia, Dora, and Margaret. Where were they? What were they? What were they up to? Where were they, and what were they up to? She told me what she knew about each of them. Aisha was now living overseas, in Doha, the capital of Qatar. Okay. But that was no surprise, because at school, she told us her father was stationed there. Equia was probably a nurse by now, since she entered the nursing school, since she entered nursing training after school. Dora was living nearby, albeit in another place. Or another neighborhood. She ran an eatery from home. Okay? Dora was living nearby, albeit in another place. She ran an eatery from home. Margaret was the only one amongst us who had a real job. She worked at a bank as a cashier and was living well, according to my source, AC. She wore suits to work. She wore suits to work sometimes and even owned a car. She wore suits to work sometimes and even owned a car. She has a car? I said, stunned. Yes, it's nice. A black car? Yes, it's a nice black car, Mommy AC said with confidence. To recruit people for the coffee shop, I would need to put out an advertisement. And the easiest and most affordable way will be on the walls of the coffee shop. And the easiest and most affordable way would be on the walls of the coffee shop. However, I had no time or intelligence to sieve out the unwanted. However, I had no time or intelligence to sieve out the unwanted. Okay, that is the unwanted ones. I mean, those she didn't want working with at the coffee shop. This is why I reached out to my old schoolmates and friends. A few days after visiting Mommy AC, I saw Margaret at the bank she worked for. I went in and asked the receptionist about her. Stating her name and position. The 30-plus-year-old woman smiled and then glanced about and then spotted someone and called, "Maggie, someone is looking for you." I turned to look in the direction of the person and then I gently smiled, yet I didn't recognize her. "Who was it?" she said, and then I began to walk towards her as she approached me. She was tall and in heels, but she wasn't in a suit, rather in a shirt and skirt. Her hair was penned just like mine, and she appeared heavier than me at 65 kilos. And she appeared heavier than me at 65 kilos. And she appeared heavier than me at 65 kilos. We stood side by side now, and she asked for my identity, and consequently, I mentioned my full name, Martha Ankobia. "Martha?" she said, smiling and staring closer at me. "Yes, Martha from Glory High School," I remarked, and then she let out a short, shallow cry. A few people turned to look at us, and then Margaret took my hand and then stepped out of the room. We sat outside on a bench beneath a tree, and then got to know each other once again. We spent the most of the 5 minutes we spoke reviving some moment of our time at school and laughing infectiously over it. When it all died down, I mentioned the issue at hand, and then her eyes lit up. She seemed so excited about me seeking someone to help run the coffee shop. I left Margaret with my phone number, and she left me with hers, plus her residence address. I left Margaret with my phone number, and she left me with hers, plus her residence address. But since I'm not so good with following addresses, she asked me to give her a call once I get to the main bus station of the town where she lives. But since I'm not so good with following addresses, she asked me to give her a call once I get to the main bus station of the town where she lives. Since I'm not so good with following directions, okay? But since I'm not so good with following directions, she asked me to give her a call once I get to the main bus station of the town where she lives. Okay, so now we know that Martha has been able to reconnect with Margaret, who is another friend of hers from high school. The first one was AC, and now is Margaret, who works at a bank as a cashier. It was about 2 miles from where the coffee shop was situated. The following week, Margaret and I were at a coffee shop. She wanted to see the place after hearing about it. It sounded like the answer to her prayer about starting a business of her own. The bank work wasn't that good, according to her. However, her $50 a month pay was impressive, according to me. After seeing the place, Margaret became the second after Mommy Essie to assist me. We reached out to Equia, the prospective nurse, since Margaret had her number, but she did not answer it because it was defunct. We sat down at the coffee house one afternoon, Margaret, Mommy Essie, and me, and discussed how we were going to recruit more people. Margaret claimed she could get some people from her church, people who wouldn't give us problems. So I counted on her to fill the gaps for about 5 waitresses and 2 cleaners. In just 3 days, she had them all, and subsequently we proceeded to cleaning up the house. Okay, so in just 3 days, she had them all, and subsequently we proceeded to cleaning up the house. Thereafter, I allocated positions to my 2 friends, Margaret and Mommy Essie. Margaret was in charge of finances, whereas Mommy Essie's job was to help me prepare the coffee and tea. And Dora, who ran a diner, was going to bring back the full meal. We used to serve while Betty was around, the rice and chicken stew. Okay, so now Betty has been able to get all the hands she needs to run the coffee shop. Okay, she's got Margaret and Mommy Essie, her 2 friends from high school, and she's got Dora, whom her friends had brought on, okay, as an additional help. Okay, thereafter I allocated positions to my 2 friends, Margaret and Mommy Essie. Margaret was in charge of finances, whereas Mommy Essie's job was to help me prepare the coffee and tea. And Dora, who ran a diner, was going to bring back the full meal we used to serve while Betty was around, the rice and chicken stew. On the 2nd week of September, fresh bread, cake, tea, and coffee was back in action. The doors of the coffee house were open once again. At 6:30 p.m., I arrived to start the coffee and tea. And Mommy Essie was there with me. She had arrived about 30 minutes earlier and had been waiting behind the closed door. I apologized for that, and then thought of getting her a spare key. Subsequently, we got started at the kitchen, taking out our ingredients for the coffee and tea. We had several boxes of fine imported coffee, but our tea came from our homegrown cocoa. It was simply wholesome chocolate powder. We mixed a sample of the coffee and chocolate in separate bowls, and then I tasted and she did the same. And subsequently, we rated the taste. Was it good enough for the customers? I believe I had great taste buds. That morning because after brushing the teeth, I only took some oats, and oats could not alter my taste, could it? I believe I had great taste buds that morning because after brushing the teeth, I only took some oats, and oats could not alter my taste, could it? Essie thought it was good, but needed a little sugar. I agreed with that. But I thought we needed more than sugar to impress the customers that morning. Okay, so I arrived at 6:30 a.m. Not p.m. I arrived at 6:30 a.m. Okay. Okay. So now we know that Martha has reopened the coffee shop, and at this moment she's with Mommy Essie, and they are tasting the coffee and chocolate drink to see how well they prepared it, okay, before serving it to the customers. Okay. But I thought we needed more than sugar to impress the customers that morning. I decided to run a special offer on our service for that day alone. I decided to run a special offer on our service for that day alone. Half price on everything as a way of welcoming them back. The patronage wasn't so high that day because we had been away for long. The patronage wasn't so high that day because we had been away for long, and people were now waking up to us. Okay, so this marks the end of the 170th page of the story, The Power of Coffee. At this point, we learn that Martha has reopened the coffee shop, and she's running the place with the help of her high school classmate, that's Mamiesi and Margaret, along with some others, okay, along with others. So that's where we are now in the story. I'll be back for the next 10 pages to make it the 180th page of the story. See you then.